Oh, shush. Shush, cat. Hi, everybody.
Right.
Hello, Pauline. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I've got a cat in the background who really likes getting into our open window. So
That's funny. I see that.
he's really wants to get outside to get to the birds at the bird feeder.
Oh, yeah. I bet.
Oh, he's such a stinker. Hey, Allison.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. How are your kids doing? Are they home too?
I only have one, and she actually is sick. She had to
Aw.
get tested for COVID yesterday.
Oh no.
So she's still in bed. I went in and tried to get her up, and she wanted to lay in bed still. So
I mean, so do I.
yeah, right? I'm like, okay.
Can I come over, please, Allison, and go sleep in your bed?
I know.
I did have a nightmare last night that my husband was running 103.5 fever. And it was mostly because he was like sleeping too close to me and I was getting really warm because he's like this furnace of a hairy man.
Yeah.
That was mine. So in the dream, I was both like really, really worried about his health and also like, oh, go away. You're so warm. I don't know what that says about me. My relationship with my husband right now, I don't know. Hi, everybody. How are you?
Good.
Excellent.
Good.
Hi, hello, Lily.
Hi.
How are you?
So tired. So tired.
Oh, man. Okay, Pat on here. Yeah, this is the time, right? Are all your classes, are they all like tests and papers and everything?
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Pretty
get together, you know, all the teachers just to make our lives miserable.
I bet you guys all choose one day a week.
We all like, how can we slowly kill them? I promise we don't do that. We don't. It just sort of naturally all goes.
It happens.
Yeah, it just happens. I promise.
Sometimes it doesn't seem like that.
I know. Sherlock. Aye. So where is everybody's in sort of the St. Louis area except for some people, right? I know that some
I'm
people
from Chicago.
Are you in Chicago?
Yeah.
Wow, very cool. Is the weather pretty there too?
Right now it's like between 50 and 60 degrees.
Wow.
So pretty cold for right now.
Yeah. I can't get enough of this weather. I know next week it's going to get too cold or too hot again, but right now it's perfect. Absolutely perfect. You will see my cat Sherlock in the background. He really likes getting into the window. Hopefully he won't be too much of a pain. Yeah, I'm talking about you. And we'll see how that goes. Yesterday he broke one of my favorite pieces of pottery ever. I was not happy. He got up there and then he freaked out because he saw, I don't know what he saw. He's kind of a stupid hunter. He's really inadequate as a hunter. And live things actually scare him. So, you know, I have a feeling he was up there and then a bird got too close and he freaked out and jumped off and broke my pottery. So, yeah, we'll see. We might. Be careful, just be careful. Okay. All right, how is everybody doing? How was the end of the novel for you? Like, I know the ending was incredibly ambiguous. How did you all feel about that ending? Are you pissed off, you know, because you get to the end and there's no, like, we don't know what happens to her? How did you all deal with that ending?
Well, when everything started to happen and Nick said Mayday's here, I was like, what is Mayday? So I looked it up, and it was supposed to be it's like a group of people who are against Gilead to help people escape.
Yeah.
So they took her, but like we don't know if she actually escaped. It's like the ending is an open ending. Like, what do you think is gonna happen?
Yeah.
And
So
I hate those endings.
remember Of Glen was part of Mayday. They kind of had this like little conversation. Do y'all remember that, Allison? Do you remember that when Of Glen and
So
she?
is that why she disappeared?
Yes. So Of Glen, if you remember earlier on in the novel, the two of them,
Oh.
and Of Glen said something about Mayday, and she said, you know, I'm one of them, and it kind of was the resistance, like the Mayday is sort of the name.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So if Glenn was one of the people in May, she was the one that kept trying to encourage of Red to like, you know, find out more about the commander and this and that, and that there was kind of like a secret password, which is Mayday, so that you could kind of identify each other. Although, you know, that's why they were having this conversation. And then as they were walking, a van pulled up and pulled another guy in, and they were both like, oh, because they thought at first the van was for them. Yeah. So Of Glen was part of Mayday too. And if you remember, when the new Of Glen wasn't that creepy, so Of Glen just disappears and this new woman is in her place. And that's why this is the conversation, because, you know, Offred is, or Offred, however you want to, I say Offred because I like that better, that she wants to try to get out of this position. But Offred is talking to the new Of Glen. And this is what she sort of says to her, right? Oh, I met Of Glen back in May, I think it was, you know, somewhere around May Day. And she's like fishing, right? She wants to know if this new Of Glen is one of the resistance or not. And it says right here, so this is on page 284, 285. I didn't know Of Glen very well, I say. I mean, the former one. Oh, she says. The fact that she says anything, however guarded, encourages me. I've only known her since May, I say. I can feel my skin growing hot, my heart speeding up. This is tricky. For one thing, a lie. And how do I get from there to the next vital word? Around the 1st of May, I think it was, what they used to call May Day. Did they? She says, light, indifferent, menacing. That isn't a term I remember. I'm surprised you do. You ought to make an effort, she pauses, to clear your mind of such. She pauses again. Echoes. So what do you think is going on there? Like, what's just happened?
I don't know, like, I kind of thought, like, you're stupid, because what if this person is working for other people who are trying to, like, get Mayday out, like, trying to stop it? I was like, why are you giving off these tips so soon to this person when you just met them?
Yes, absolutely. And why would she? Why would Offred like put herself in that position and try to fish around to see if the new Of Glen is part of Mayday?
She doesn't want to be alone.
Yeah, I think
she
so.
needs a companion. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of her like sense of hope in a way.
Yeah. And unfortunately though, like she's kind of clumsy about it and might be putting herself in danger. And so the rest of us, as we're reading it, I don't know about you, but I was like, oh, you know, you don't know this person. She could be an eye. Do you remember this term that was used throughout the novel? Do you remember that, Brianna? What is an eye?
An eye is basically like a spy. So they're the eyes and ears of Gilead. So whatever they see something, they report it. And so, like that.
And who could be an eye? Anybody could be an eye.
I might say, isn't Nick an eye?
He could be. We don't know. Like, is Nick part of Mayday?
I was gonna say, like, I started watching the TV series because, you know, morbid curiosity. And in that one, he is an eye, but kind of like a backwards one. Like, if that makes sense. Like, he works for them, but also tries to get handmaids out, or at least he tried to get offered out in the series, not in the book.
Yeah, and we don't know.
The series is a lot different. Yeah, it's good though.
Yeah, it is. this is much more internal, right? So we're really seeing things from her point of view. We're not seeing things as like a camera. And we'll get to that a little bit later. But yeah, the eyes are all spies. Anybody really can be an eye. Anyone. One of the handmaids could be an eye. Nick could be an eye. Anyone who works in a house could be an eye. Your neighbor could be an eye. Anyone can turn anyone in at any point in this society. And this is true for a lot of dictatorships, a lot of authoritarian regimes, you know, like Maoist China. If you're got pissed off at your neighbor because the neighbor wasn't, I don't know, mowing their lawn or putting the recycling out too early or whatever, you could just call up, like literally talk to a person and say, I think my neighbor is against Mao. And they would come round up the neighbor and re-educate him, usually not through, if you can imagine, pretty like the colonies for these women. So this is, again, nothing's new in this novel in terms of how Gilead is trying to control the population. And if you can turn people against each other, if you can make it so you can't trust anyone and that you're always on alert, then they've got a significant sort of psychological control over you. It's sort of like 1984, if any of you read that novel. Perfect. So we don't know what Nick is. We're not quite sure. So let's backtrack a little bit in that scene between Offred and the commander at Jezebel's. So she meets Mora. We all know how that turns out. I know so many of us were heartbroken because we wanted Mora to be the one who escapes. We wanted her to be the one who was brave and takes down the regime with her. And unfortunately, at least in this book, at least as far as we know right now, she's ends up a prostitute at Jezebel's. And also tragically resigned. Remember, she was always a fighter. She was always resisting, always, always, always. And now she's sort of just resigned to being a whore for these commanders. Let's think about that sexual encounter between the commander and Offred at Jezebel's. So the commander takes her up to the hotel room so that, you know, as he can say, they can jump the gun. The ceremony is supposed to happen the next night. So they, yeah. What do you guys think about that? The first time when I asked you about the ceremony and I asked, you know, does this constitute rape? Most of you sort of worked yourselves around to, well, yeah, you know, it's not really a choice. If you tell a woman you can either go to the colonies and work yourself to death or be in this position, that's not really a choice. Obviously, Offred didn't want to be there. It wasn't like consensual sex in our definition of consensual sex, at least the modern day one. What about that moment in the hotel room? What do you all think about that? This is happening between pages like 253 to 255.
I mean, I still think, oh, sorry.
Oh, you're good. I think what you were going to say and what I'm saying now is I think it still constitutes as rape because, again, they have these secret meetings, and in the text you can obviously see that Offred doesn't want to be there. She's very uncomfortable with it. And again, what's the alternative? She says no or she refuses, and then the commander gets mad and could possibly out her for all the things that she's been doing, even though it was his idea in the first place. Like, who's going to believe her?
Right. Right. I mean, well, who could she go to, Emily? You know, like,
Right.
she's doing so illegal right now. Yeah.
Right.
But I also believe it's a means, a way to survive in that society.
Yes.
Because even though she doesn't want to do it, I'm like, she needs to have sex with him because if she doesn't, she can't like extract information from him. She can't get what she needs. Being with the commander, she was able to get the little things that she wanted, which gives her so much power than everyone else in Gilead.
Right. Right. Caitlin, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think this is where kind of the grooming came into play too, like what he was doing with her before. So now she doesn't see him as like just this commander figure that does this once a month with her. Like now he's kind of a person, even though a trash person to her. You know, he's kind of just like groomed her into like having some sort of sympathy for him. And I think this also goes to show the failure, the intrinsic failure of these commanders, because their goal was to wipe out sin and moral corruptness and stuff, but they're still going to places like Jezebel's, like a speakeasy. You know, it's like a really hypocritical.
Incredibly. And my father has been living in Saudi Arabia for the last 30 years. And the princes, you know, this is an incredibly strict society. Women can't leave the house without covering pretty much their entire bodies, their face, everything. No drinking of any kind, no socialization, very, very strict. But the royal family, they party all the time, y'all. Like, there are stories of them, you know, flying off to various parts in Europe, drinking, having multiple affairs. I mean, women and men. I mean, they're incredibly, right? So again, this book, what's showing is that many of these autocratic societies, the rules that are in place for the regular people are very much not the rules that are in place for those in power, right? Those in power get to enjoy everything that they've stripped away from those underneath them. And the commander is one of them. Yeah, Emily, go ahead.
I actually had a question about that, and I ended up going and looking it up on Google to see what other people thought when they read this book. What happens to the daughters that are born out of this? Do they become handmaids, or are they, because I can't imagine these rich parents saying, oh yes, my child is now going to be a handmaid.
Yeah, most of them, if you notice during the Pravaganza we read last time, most of those daughters would end up married to men either in the military or other commanders, up and coming men of power. So that Pravaganza was a collection of these commanders' daughters dressed all in white, being married off to these men that are in positions of, does that make sense, Emily? But if you want to know specifically to the two children of Offred, then you need to read the next novel that Margaret Atwood just released this last year, Testaments, because that goes through. Yeah, so it's another novel that she wrote as a sequel to Handmaid's Tale.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would give you my copy, Emily, if you lived in town. I don't know. Yeah, I could give you my copy. It's
okay. I'll pick it up from the library or something.
Yeah, get it from the library.
I will say that this book has made me want to want to watch the Hulu thing, because I want to know what type of chaos is in it, just because reading it was such an adventure.
Yeah, and to me, it's interesting because so much of this interior story of hers is about that reconstruction. I want to read you this. We've been talking about, is this rape that happens in a hotel room? And Brianna made a really good point. She's like, this is her way of surviving, right? This is the only thing that's in her control, is to some degree trying to manipulate her relationship with the commander. And we've all talked about that, how twisted this all is, that she didn't really have a choice about seeing the commander in the first place, but it is her only way of maybe getting something that she wants or needs. You know what I mean? So it's really this weird tug and pull. On page 255, she's sitting in the bathroom and she's trying to convince herself to go out and have sex with commander. Do you remember this? It's so painful for me to read, right? It's just painful. She's sitting there and she keeps berating herself, get your butt out there, just do it. You've got to do this. Obviously, for all of us, we would think this is obviously not consensual, in the sense that she feels like throwing up. She doesn't want to go out there so much. But this is what she says on page 255. I lie there like a dead bird. He is not a monster, I think. And the reason I pulled that example of that mistress with the SS officer is that that's what the mistress was saying about him. He was not a monster. Do you see what I'm talking about? He's not a monster. He's not a monster. He's not a monster. He's not a monster. And that's what she has to say to herself now in order to convince herself that it's okay for her to have sex with this man. She keeps saying he's not an unkind man. He gives me lotion. He gave me, he's taken me on a night out. She has to try to convince herself. And I think for me, the power of this novel is that I think Pat, you talked about this in your discussion board. I thought this was really, really interesting. You were like, he's just a sad old man. You know what I mean? Like in many ways, he's just a sad old man, but he also has so much power. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think he's just kind of like I don't know. At one point earlier in the book, he seemed like a sad old man, and then it just seems throughout the rest of the book like he just wants to take advantage of his high ranking and power.
Of course he does.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that there's a couple of things for me when I'm reading this novel. One is that most of the men who have done horrific things, you're looking at Hitler, you're looking at Mao, you're looking at, Stalin, they also were just kind of sad old men, like they were lonely, they were isolated, they were probably sexually frustrated. I mean, they were human beings, but they were also given such tremendous control and power over other people. And so I think what Atwood is doing with this novel is sort of warning us a little bit. Like, it's not, the people who are able to do this to other people are not like, I don't know, impervious. They're not like superhuman. They're incredibly human, They're so human that we can read about, if we didn't know what Hitler did and we read about his biography, we'd be like, oh, that's kind of a sad biography. Does that make sense, everybody? Like the men who do this are lonely and isolated and very, very human, and also granted such power and are able to do such evil to other people. And I don't want us to lose sight of that, It's almost though that she has to convince herself that he's not a monster, he's not a monster, he's not a monster. I can do this because he's not. And we can tell that she's not necessarily convincing herself. I mean, because is he a monster? Is he just a lonely old man? What does it mean to be a monster in this society? I mean, it's really, I don't know, it's a very complex, I think, psychological examination of what power does to people. Both those who don't have any, right, Pauline, like these handmaids who have no power, but also what power does, how it corrupts people who have all of it. It does make them into monsters, and they don't even recognize it. They just think they are lonely old, I'm just doing whatever, right, Pat? Like, I don't think he thinks that he's being monsters. I think he thinks he's doing a favor. I think he really thinks that he's doing a favor for Offred.
Yeah, I think I agree. Like, I think that's probably how he sees it, but it's just not the case.
I was going to say, I think that whole part about her convincing herself is kind of a nod to society and how, like, men automatically assume that some men, not all, automatically assume that they take a woman out for dinner or something, they owe him something. And I think that was a huge nod towards that as well.
Yeah, let's take a look at that last part. Oh, Pauline, yes, go ahead.
I had a question about, like, somewhere it said in, like, I think it was, like, the after notes or something like that, the guys were also, like, infertile or something, and not just the girls. Was that, like, an actual thing in, like, I think it said Russia or something. Like, was that actually a thing, or is that not, like, real?
Yeah, no, these men are actually, most of them are infertile. We kind of know that throughout the whole book, right? That the commanders especially can't, they're shooting blanks. But nobody can say that. It's against the law to say that men are infertile. Only women can have, problems conceiving, right? So it's this weird thing where even the doctor was like, we all know these guys are infertile, so let me have sex with you. Like, everybody, I mean, it's just so corrupt that if you see a pregnant handmaid, chances are it's some other man who's impregnating her. It's not.
So, like, why are they all infertile and not, like, the doctors or, like, other people? Like, is that the regime that did that to them, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think the novel never quite makes that clear. We know that in the historical notes that all the different conditions mentioned in the novel, so radiation, there was a nuclear fallout from a nuclear bomb, the AIDS epidemic. So there's maybe perhaps a little bit of a nod that these commanders, I mean, if they're going to Jezebel's, Pauline, this is not the first time these men have been fooling around with prostitutes. So it's very possible that a lot of the men on the upper echelons have some sort of STD that makes them infertile. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, there's evidence that, you know, especially in polling, they're old men. You know, I mean, the same thing happens with men as happens with women. They can still have children later on in life, it's true. But the rate of fertility drops significantly after the age of 40 and 50. So, you know, but they're also the men in power, so nobody can tell them they're infertile. You know, they can't admit that to themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of makes me laugh because this book seems to use science or science or medical science when it's, what's the word for it? Acceptable, I guess, in these laws, but like if it's not, then it's like, no, it's not true.
I know. It seems kind of like, I don't know, present day, right? Where people still will believe in science when it's convenient for them, but ignore it when it doesn't align with their perspective. Yeah, Kelly, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm listening.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if you unclicked yourself because you wanted to speak up.
Sorry.
I actually have a point.
Yeah.
I was gonna say that that's what makes this book so interesting, but at the same time, it makes the reader wonder, because while some of these things do seem really, really radical and out there, it's not a far jump from how society is today. A lot of the things that Offred was describing about her life beforehand and what led up to this reminded me a lot about stuff that you could kind of see today as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes the book so interesting.
Yeah, the one part that always catches me when they talk about, you know, how the new government of Gilead was able to kind of take over and declare martial law, for example, was because of Islamic terrorists. You know, the Islamist terrorists supposedly came in, you know, bombed the Congress, killed the president. We know now that it was most likely not Islamic terrorists. It was soldiers of Gilead who pretended, you know, who faked this assassination, pretending to be Islamic terrorists. And every time I read that, I'm like, yep. Like, that's the way it might go down today. If there were people who wanted to take over the American government or to install a bunch of fear in the American people, it would be some sort of Islamic terrorists, or now maybe Antifa, you know, whatever, you know, calling other people terrorists, calling other people whatever. I mean, Emery, I see that too. I see that too. Every time, you know, I taught this novel, I've been teaching it for several years now. And at first, I think my students were like, oh yeah, this can't happen. And the farther we've gone on, like the more I've taught this recently, the more people are like, you know, like there's a heightened sense of a little bit of fear. And for all of us out here, I know I'm not saying anything new to you, but since the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, there's, you know, probably most likely, another judge will be appointed to the Supreme Court. I don't think there's really any way to stop that before the next president takes over, whomever that might be. And there could be significant changes to abortion in this country. So this is, I mean, and I'm not telling you, you know, which way politically you should feel or morally you should feel, but again, we often think that progress goes like this. We often think that what has been given is going to just get blah, 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 blah. You know, and what Atwood keeps saying in almost every interview, especially now, you know, as she lives in Toronto, Canada, she's like, what has been given can be taken away. You know, and we think about things as being like progress, like we're always going in this direction. But history always swings. And think about what happened in Iran within weeks. Women who were in Congress were no longer allowed to be in government. Women who were in education were no longer allowed to be taught. And women who were married were no longer allowed to get divorced. Like that. It happens. It happens. I'm sorry, Emery, not to get too dark or anything, but Emery, go ahead.
Oh, you're totally fine. And I just wanted to say one last point on this. I actually saw a video on social media of somebody talking about the comparisons between The Handmaid's Tale and what's happening today. And as soon as I saw that, I'm like, oh, Okay. Thank
Yeah.
you. I really did not want to know that.
Yeah, I know. And again, we have a lot of checks and balances in our government system, and I still, like, I'm trying to be as active as a citizen as I can be, so that so this experiment known as the United States of America, like what's going to happen, all of us, I still feel like we have a say, that we still have a say, Anne-Marie. So, vote, get politically active, everything that you can be, because
Absolutely.
yeah, because we still do.
Most important.
It's not Handmaid's Tale yet, Pat, go ahead.
No. I was just agreeing. I was like, this is probably the most important time to vote, I'd say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Amen. Okay.
Now I have a question.
Kelly.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So one thing like I did not understand like in the book is why like the women never rebel, because like they can't kill all of the women, because if they do, that'll be the end of Gilead. So I just didn't understand, like,
Really great question. Anybody want to try to answer that? Why do the women not, come together and rebel?
And also because like it's weird, but I like in my other responses, like some of this stuff I kind of also like compare it like towards slavery, like how a lot of people always ask like why the slaves didn't come together, because it was more of them to fight back.
And then how do you respond to that? Because I know that must be really frustrating to be asked that again and again. Like, if they didn't like it so much, why didn't they rebel?
So I think that with the way that their society is, they're never really given the opportunity to, come up with some kind of a plan. Like they say that friendships are not allowed. So there's not really a lot of talking or planning or anything like that they can do. So I just really don't see where an opportunity would be for them to plan something, because like you guys said, there is way more of them than there is everybody else. So they could easily take out everybody else, but how and when are they going to have the time and freedom really to plan that?
I was going to say that, and I think it has something to do with the brainwashing that went on during the testimonies and the training. And also, whenever you have this type of situation, you're going to have those people that want to rebel, that want to get out, but you're also going to have those people that are accepting and want to stay in it for self-preservation because they're scared of what might happen if they try to rebel, especially when you have eyes everywhere, especially whenever you've been punished so horridly by the Red Center. They're taught that even though they are valuable to society, they are replaceable. So death is not a far reach for them.
I think that the character like Janine or Janice is a good example of that. Like she was normal, and then she got like brainwashed by all of it, and in the end I think it even says in the book like she was like gone or whatever, like she actually like lost her sanity and everything. So I agree.
Yeah, and I feel like the colonies too, like the idea of having to work so hard for the rest of your life scares some of the people. Like Caitlin said, like some people are like, oh, screw this, like let's rebel, let's all team up together. Like they probably had their thought in their head, but then the others are like scared of what might happen to them, like even being sent off to the colonies and having to work. And so they're pretty much settling for the life that they are being forced to live.
I think another point onto this is that we do see a faction of rebels in the Mayday group, but then through the indoctrination with the Red Center and all of that, and also I feel like the leaders of the society have made the rebels the evil and the villain of their quote-unquote story, and so a lot of handmaids would be really, really hesitant to join them when they've heard all of these bad stories about them, even if they're not true. But
Right.
it's again, that goes into that indoctrination thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Simone de Beauvoir talks about this even throughout history, right? Throughout history, women have been in positions of oppression, right? And the question she asks is, you know, Kelly, to your point, there were many slave rebellions, right, throughout history. Many on the islands, some in the United States. It wasn't as if that never happened. And she sort of asks, and then of course Kelly later on, right, civil rights movement, that there were these huge marches that to be like, you know, an African American meant that you had, you know, that you could like visibly see each other and coalesce around like a certain specific rights, like voting rights or equality or work rights or what have you. And she asks, you know, why don't women do the same thing historically? I mean, we kind of did for the vote, but even then, Kelly, it was very much like that was white middle class women who did that. You know, it wasn't very inclusive. And so I think the question, she's been asking that throughout history. And what she said this, that so much of a woman's identity is, again, bound up with her relationship with men, right? Like even our titles, Miss, Mrs., Ms., right? That's bound up with, are we married? Are we single? Are we divorced? Does that make sense, everybody? And that so much of, you know, and if that's true, if our very identity, if our who we are and the role we play is significantly tied to our relationship with men, then we're going to look at each other as competition, right? We're going to look at each other in terms of not how we like should get along and bind together and really support each other, but as in like, hey, if our very like livelihood, if our identity is tied to whom we can, you know, get, then who's my biggest competition? Allison, you know, my biggest, Pauline. You see what I'm talking about? And that is in it, like creates this sense of, and we can see this in The Handmaid's Tale. I mean, Serena and Offred, neither of them are happy in this system. But instead of really targeting and saying, you know, who's at fault? It's the commander. Let's band together and bring this man down. They're over the sad old, you know, unattractive man. Like, you know what I mean? Like they're, you know, they're kind of jealous of me. They're sort of like, you know, it's setting up a system where women are judging each other. Remember at the very beginning how those two Marthas are talking about Offred, and one of them was like, I would never do that, you know. She's whoring herself. And so already this system, because of its role playing, it's hard for these women to see each other past those relationships, right? And past that kind of competitive, weird, judgmental stuff going on.
I think we can tie that back to, oh geez, I forgot who said it, so I apologize. The competition is another way in which the society has spread women apart, so that way they can't band together and overthrow whoever's in charge of them.
Yeah. And also on page 271, this is also very, very true, that people get used to whatever you give them, right? She says this after she starts her affair with Nick, and she starts to fall in love with him. She says that she no longer, of Glenn is the old one, the former of Glenn, is constantly like, find out what you can from the commander. We can get you a key, you know, find some paperwork, like do what you can to try to topple this regime. And Offred is sort of like, I'm not really concerned about that anymore. On page 271, she says, some days I was more rational. I did not put it to myself in terms of love. I said, I have made a life for myself here of a sort. That must have been what the settlers' wives thought, and women who survived wars, if they had a man. Humanity is so adaptable, my mother would say. Truly amazing what people could get used to, as long as there were a few compensations. So for many of these women, perhaps they felt like they were compensated enough. They could make enough of a life for themselves, even in societies in which they're incredibly oppressed, because they have just a few little, you know, little tidbits of being okay in that reality. And as we've all been talking about, when we think about, again, our own society, our own country, our own lives, what would be the tipping point for you all? When would you feel that you had had enough, or that you were willing to risk your life, you know, in order to change a society that you thought was truly damaging and dangerous. For many of us, you know, maybe we're there. Maybe we're looking around at America today and we're like, this isn't cool. You know, like, let's go march on the streets, right? But for many of us, we're very complacent, you know, because we can get a decent house and because we can get a decent job and because we can have, you know, children and raise them in relative luxury. I mean, we're okay. We as human beings, we tend to put up with quite a bit as long as we're thrown those little bones.
Yeah, I was gonna also say too, like with certain movements and stuff that's going on now, a lot of people feel like, oh well, like if it's not affecting me, like I'm not gonna participate, you know.
Amen, Kelly. Yep. And that's why, at least this summer, it was interesting because I think so many of the marches for Black Lives Matter were attended by white people, and that made a difference. You know, because if we're going to change the system in this country, can't just be the oppressed group saying this isn't right. It's got to be everybody. And the same thing with women's rights. You know, it can't just be women who are saying this isn't right. It has to be men too. And so this one reason why these women, it's hard for them to get together is because maybe many of the men don't mind this system, right? They don't mind it enough to help the women. Although again, with May Day, we can see that was a, you know, many different genders, many different people, many different roles, some at the commander level, perhaps, some at the ant level, perhaps, some at the, so there was a whole coalition of resistance, people who are willing to put their lives on the line to topple this overall system. But yeah, Emery.
Actually, in one of my other classes I'm taking this semester, we talked about privileges and then what we call the invisible knapsack. And I feel like it ties into this book because a lot of how you said the men, they're complacent because they're okay with the society. I feel like that also comes from a place of, well, it's not happening to them, so they don't think it's happening to anybody. And we see that a lot in today's society as well.
Yeah, I know. And it's one thing that I love about literature, honestly. I love teaching literature is that, and we're going to get this with the other two novels that we're reading. It's, we're going to be seeing reality through perspectives that we maybe haven't contemplated before, you know? And I think that's a powerful thing. It's something that you can learn facts about history, right? But until you read it from the perspective of a subject, it doesn't quite make it as real. I want to read you too this idea of how she's, you know, I think Emery brought up a really, really good point when she's in that hotel room with the commander and she's trying to convince herself. And she says this, she keeps kind of repeating this mantra almost. On page 255, fake it, I screamed to myself inside my head. You must remember how. Ouch. Right, Emery? Let's get this over with or you'll be there all night. Bestir yourself, move your flesh around, breathe audibly. It's the least you can do. And Emery, you were bringing up the point that this probably isn't the first time that Offred is having sex with a man that she doesn't really want to have sex with, that she feels obligated to for whatever reason, because he spent money on her, because he took her out for dinner, because he really wanted it and she was maybe tired and didn't really want it herself, but you know, figured, okay, whatever. Does that make sense? Like the reason why this passage right here is reminiscent. You must remember how, you know, you know? And so again, Emery, you're absolutely right that in many ways, of course, Gilead is worlds different from society before, but in some ways, maybe not as much as we'd like to believe, right? That in the past, she obviously remembers how to fake enjoyment just to get the sex over with because she didn't really want to be there in the first place. Yeah, sad times. Okay, let's jump back then a little bit. A couple of the other questions that I wanted to talk to you about. What's going on with Nick? So of course she keeps going back to him. But even that first encounter with Nick, she has about 3 different ways that she describes it, right? So let's turn to those nights. So let's take a look on page 260 and 261. This is the first way she describes their first sexual encounter. He steps back and aside to let me pass. He's in his shirt sleeves and is holding a cigarette lit. I smell the smoke on him and the warm air of the room all over. I'd like to take off my clothes, bathe in it, rub it over my skin. No preliminaries. He knows why I'm here. He doesn't even say anything. Why fool around? It's an assignment. He moves away from me, turns off the lamp. Outside, like punctuation, there's a flash of lightning, almost no pause, and then the thunder. He's undoing my dress, a man made of darkness. I can't see his face, and I can hardly breathe, hardly stand, and I'm not standing. His mouth is on me, his hands. I can't wait, and he's moving already. Love, it's been so long. I'm alive in my skin again, arms around him, falling and water softly everywhere, never ending. I knew it might be only once. And then she says, I made that up. It didn't happen that way. Here is what happened. And then he gives a sort of like a starker account that he's not happy that she's here, that he's not overly friendly, that they're very clumsy and awkward. And then finally they sort of laugh. And then she says, it doesn't happen that way either. I'm not sure how it happened. Not exactly. All I can hope for is a reconstruction. The way love feels is always only approximate. Partway through, I thought about Serena Joy sitting down there in the kitchen thinking, cheap. They'll spread their legs for anyone. All you need to give them is a cigarette. And I thought afterwards, this is betrayal. Not the thing itself, but my own response. If I knew for certain he's dead, of course she's talking about Luke, right? If I knew for certain Luke's dead, would that make a difference? I would like to be without shame. I would like to be shameless. I want, like to be ignorant, and I would not know how ignorant I was, right? She says, in one of the reconstructions, she said, there wasn't any thunder, though. I added that in to cover up the sounds that I am ashamed of making, you know? So what is going on there? Why, when she talks about this first sexual encounter with Nick, is she going through like 3 different versions of this story? And some of them are like romantic, and some of them are like stark and realistic. I mean, what's going on there, do you think?
I don't think she like remembers exactly how it was, because I think she got so caught up in the moment that she hasn't had consensual sex in so long that like she's so used to basically having no choice, like, oh, I have to sleep with the commander or else I'm going to the colonies, or oh, I have to do this. So like when she actually has the chance to like break the rules and do something for herself, she gets more caught up in the moment and almost can't explain every event how it went word for word. And I think she's trying to play back in her head, like when she first made it sound like it was going to be like very romantic and all this and that, the first way that she explained it, I think that's how she like originally wanted it. But then at the end, whenever she said, all I can hope for is like a recreation of like love and stuff like that and romance, I think that's what she yearns for. But obviously she knows like it can't be like that, because she knows it just has to be strictly them breaking the rules.
Yeah. Really beautiful. Anybody else? I mean, why would she have this kind of reconstruction? Like, I mean, you made a beautiful point. This is probably the first time that she's actually enjoyed sex in years.
She even says, doesn't she say like, I make of him an idol? Like she says that like she respects him, and she like at one of the reconstructions, she even points out that she finds herself like telling him her real name and like doing all this, but he kind of just like stares at her and then like doesn't really respond. And then like after she explains that he's not like replying to her, they just like go into having sex. Like it's not really, he doesn't really want to sit there and talk. He wants to do what they're there to do, and then that's it.
Yeah. And at that point, Lily, were you sort of like, oh, for the love of God, stop.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't trust him. You can't trust him. Like that's, you feel very anxious, right? I mean,
you could feel that it was wrong. Like even like you knew that what they were doing was wrong, but like they knew it too. And I think that's why they wanted it to be over so fast though.
Yeah. But then she keeps going back, right?
Yeah.
Even though she knows it's dangerous, even though she knows it's wrong, even though she doesn't know if Nick is to be trusted.
Mm-hmm.
Even if she doesn't even know if he's been doing this before with the other handmaids. She doesn't even ask him.
Sorry.
Yeah, Emery.
I feel like she also is explaining this in some of these reconstructions, because Oh no. Sorry, my mind just went blank. Since it is the first time that she's had consensual sex in a very long time, I feel like she wants it to be this way, and so well, part of it is she doesn't remember. She's also trying to convince herself that this was the way it happened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think because this book, again, we are getting this only from the inside narrative perspective of Offred, you know? This isn't, you know, in the series, you have a camera that's following around these characters. It's like from an objective point of view. But this book is not an objective point of view. It's from her point of view. And, you know, she's trying to reconstruct this moment where there are so many emotions mixed in, some of which is just pure sexual desire. Some of it, which is, you know, tinged with possible love for this man, you know, love in the sense of like desperate, you know, desperation of somebody to hold on to, like somebody's flesh. You know, for once, everyone think about this. This is the only time she has ever been touched by somebody who doesn't necessarily want something from her. I mean, think about that. The only time she is ever touched is by men or women like Serena holding on to her hands in a way that is taking something from her. Does that make sense? This is the only time she's being touched when something's being given back. And like, I think for her, there's guilt. There's guilt because every time she has sex with Nick, it's like she's cheating on Luke in some, you know, some sort of weird way. She knows that she's putting herself at risk. She knows that this could be very dangerous on many different levels. She doesn't seem to be able to stop herself. This is the only reason why she wants to keep on living. I mean, all of that is mixed up. How could you possibly objectively account, you know, for what happens between you and another person when all that emotional baggage is being brought to that action, to that event, you know? It's really, to me, that's a beautiful novel because it's really showing how much of our reality, yours, mine, Pauline's, Allison's, Kelly, all of our realities, what we think of as happening to us, is really our brains trying to reconstruct and make everything into a sort of story. Does that make sense? And why do we do that? Why do we want to have a story? Because the idea of things just randomly happening to us that we don't have control over is truly, truly frightening. So I want to read you something from the very beginning of the novel on page 39 about why reconstruction. She reconstructs how she thinks about the commander, right? Like you can see her trying to reconstruct her interactions with the commander in a way that makes those interactions safe or tame or acceptable, right? She reconstructs her interactions with Nick to try to convince herself that this is enough to live on, right? 39. I would like to believe this is a story I'm telling. I need to believe it. I must believe it. Those who can believe that such stories are only stories have a better chance. If it's a story I'm telling, then I have control over the ending. Then there will be an ending to the story, and real life will come after it. I can pick up where I left off. It isn't a story I'm telling. It's also a story I'm telling in my head as I go along. Tell rather than write, because I have nothing to write with, and writing is in any case forbidden. But if it's a story, even in my head, I must be telling it to someone. You don't tell a story only to yourself. There's always someone else, even when there is no one. A story is like a letter. Dear you, I'll say, just you, without a name. Attaching a name attaches you to the world of fact, which is riskier, more hazardous. Who knows what the chances are out there of survival? Yours. I will say, you, like an old love song, you can mean more than one. You can mean thousands. I'm not in any immediate danger, I'll say to you. I'll pretend you can hear me, but it's no good because I know you can't. And I think that's such a beautiful passage very early on in this novel, showing that as she's telling us what's happening to her, that she is employing some of the same techniques of fiction writers, right? Trying to reconstruct so that maybe she looks better, or that other characters look better or worse, right? Like that's what we do with people we don't like. We make them look a little worse in our own narratives. Like she's trying to make this as much into a story because with a story, she can control it. And I think what's so frustrating for so many of us at the end of this novel is that we don't really know what happens, right? She says she's not writing it down because it's forbidden. So how is this story coming to us? We learn about this in the historical notes. How does she record these thoughts of hers? Does anybody know? Did you catch that in the historical notes?
Is it tapes?
Tapes.
Are they found like in the bunker or something, like in a bunker, in a metal box?
Yes. So what we can assume is that it was Mayday who came to save her, and that they got her to a safe spot, some sort of, you know, somewhere relatively safe, although still in Gilead. And she's down in a bunker somewhere in some sort of basement, and they've given her tapes, and there's a tape recorder, and she's recording her thoughts. How does that change, when you found that out, how does that change how this novel is organized? How does that change how you, did that change how you read this, or the message?
It's more of like a reflection.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a, not weird, but a different realization. You know, because I never really had even thought about that, but like the way that she's writing it, you would think that, like, you know, that it's happening right now, that it's like a diary, but she doesn't have any of those means.
Right.
It's also like a lot easier to like change your story afterwards than when you're actually like going through it. So it also makes it like less objective if you're telling something like afterwards over when you're like writing it down in the moment.
It's also much harder to erase, you know? Like it's much harder to go back on a tape and tape over. Does that make sense, everybody? So everything that she says, when she talks about reconstruction, like sometimes you can see that makes sense now. Like she'll go through a story and then she'll go, wait a minute, that's not really true. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Because when you're writing, you can go back, you can erase it on the computer, you can, you know, cross it out, but she can't really do that in a tape. So it's, in some ways, maybe perhaps it's even more honest. Does that make sense, everybody? Because you're trying to get it out and you can't go back and revise. You can reconstruct, but you can't revise. And those are different things.
Yeah.
Emery, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, you're good. It also makes a lot more sense the way that the style is with the writing, because now it's more of like a reflection on it. And so, whereas like at the beginning of the book, I was so confused. I think I actually asked a question about it, about the quotation marks in that in one of my discussion posts. But now, knowing that this is a tape recording, it makes sense because it's a reflection on what her experience, and so it would make sense that she's tying in little pieces from the past or remembering what they said instead of them actually saying it.
Yes. Good.
Yeah, I was gonna say the punctuation makes a lot more sense because it was a pet peeve of mine whenever there were no quotation marks when there was supposed to be dialogue, and I'm like, why? But it makes a lot more sense if she's like recounting something and saying like, oh, well, he said this, you know, and she's the one talking. She, like, the whole book is basically a quotation mark.
That's right. Pat, did you want to jump in?
Oh, I forgot what I was going to say now. Sorry.
No. It's hard sometimes to click on a Zoom. Yeah, you're all brilliant. Yeah. And I think that it accounts for some of the fragmentation too. Right? Like this seems more fragmented than if she had written it out and been able to go back and revise and reconstruct and everything else. And that's, so this is sort of fragmented. It makes sense now that all of the past and the present are all sort of mixed in together because it's more of a free flow of thoughts. Imagine even trying to recount your day in a tape recorder, and then you'd be like, oh, this happened. Oh, wait a minute. Actually, it began over here. You know what I mean? Like, whoa, well, it would be harder to make it as much of a coherent whole. Yeah. So, nice. All right. I'm going to check real quick and see what other, I can't remember what other, okay. Yeah. All right. Let's talk about that salvaging, because it's just so disturbing, that salvaging. And she can't quite, she says, she keeps like hesitating about this salvaging. Even before she tells us about the salvaging, she says, I don't want to be telling this story. I don't come off looking so good. So what's going on with the salvaging? Why does she have such a hard time telling us about the salvaging? And what is the salvaging? How did you all read that? What is that about?
So isn't the salvaging just like a public execution of somebody that the handmaids kind of participate in?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So the salvaging, and this is actually taken from the Philippines. When an autocrat took over the Philippines, he would have salvagings too. There would be a very public sort of hanging of political prisoners. And usually, typically, you would have a person of power get up and say, this is what their crimes were, and then they'd be hanged, and everybody sort of had to watch and clap. You know, yes, okay, good, nice hanging. But even in our own history, we've had such public displays of, throughout our history, with various people, we would call them like extrajudicial killings. Especially of Black men growing up, in the South, with lynchings. And when you see pictures of those photos from the time, there will be crowds of people like having a picnic, young children, people smiling into the camera as a body is hanging behind them. It's incredibly disturbing. So this idea, again, of having this like public display and approval of hangings is again, nothing new, not even in our own history is it anything that's new. But here, there was an extra little part. It was like a patricide. It was what you'd call like the killing of men by these women. And it was really strange. Like she just keeps describing the rope that was around. How does she feel though? This man is brought out, supposedly had raped a handmaid, and the handmaid lost her baby. And even though Offred doesn't agree with the society, even though Offred would give anything to be in the time before. So she is not completely brainwashed, is she? I mean, you can see that it's worked her way into how she sees herself, this sort of brainwashing, but she's not entirely brainwashed. She wants to be a part of May Day, for example. She wants to be a part of the resistance. Maybe not if it takes her away from Nick, but even she, when she hears the story of this man, she is filled with a kind of bloodlust, right? Like all she wants to do is tear this man apart. What do you think is going on? Why have something like this patricide for these women?
I mean, I think out of all the injustices done, like, she's already facing injustice, and this is just, like, one more that kind of tips the pot, and something she can control and the other handmaids can kind of control.
Yes. Yes.
Like they're actually being put in like a power position at that moment, like they can control something. Yeah.
I also believe it's like a way to release your stress. Since they don't want to be there, they have so much anger, take the anger out on them, and then they'll be fine going back to the house. And then everything will be set in stone.
Jumping off of, sorry.
That's okay. I was going to say this whole part in the book is very ironic because the commanders are raping the handmaids all the time.
Yes. Yeah.
I was actually going to say somewhat the same thing. Jumping off of Brianna's point, they were able to get all of their anger off of this one man that raped somebody. And I feel like on the flip side of this, it's also a way for the aunts, the commanders and that to say, see, this is what rape looks like. What we're doing isn't. And so while it is catharsis for them, it's also kind of like protection for the people who are doing this, but in places of power.
Yeah, brilliant. It also talks about, I think that as we've been talking about grooming, the commander is grooming her, obviously, to do more and more dangerous things, and also grooming her to accept sexual contact with him, right? Like that seems to be his overall plan, getting her to a point where she willingly, we're going to put those in quotation marks, okay? Really big ones, willingly has sex with him, like chooses to have sex with him, even though we know that there really isn't a choice. And even though we know that she's sitting in that bathroom wishing there was anything she could do but sleep with this man, that was part of his power and control over her, right? He can kind of do whatever he wants. And then here you can see that overall this society is grooming these women too, because now they have blood on their hands. Now they're complicit in this system, right? Now they have turned another human being into an it, which is what you need to do in order to kill. You have to turn it into an it. Do you remember even that scene when Luke kills their cat? Do you remember that? Oh, it was so sad. They had to kill the cat before they left, right? Because if the cat's wandering around and hungry and neighbors hear it, they'll suspect something is up, and it's not like you can take the cat to the pound. So Luke goes out to kill it. And that's what she says. She says, they force you to kill what is precious to you, this society. That's what they keep doing. They just force you to keep killing what is most precious to you. And here, these women are doing what these men have done to them. They are turning this human being into an it in order to have control, in order to murder, and in order to feel like they've got a semblance of power. Does that make sense? And that makes them, to some degree, grooms them into being complicit members in this society. Because if they leave, they would have to like admit, I tore a man, you know, you saw Janine with like hunks of hair in her hand, just going, oh, you know, by that time she sort of lost it. Yeah, it's a really powerful and also a disturbing moment. And again, something that has happened throughout history. All right, and then let's take a look at the you towards the end. I want to take a look on page 267. This is such a beautiful, beautiful passage. So that first passage I read to you about a story and how she says, if you write a story, there has to be a you. You can be one person, you can be thousands. Who do you think is the you there that she's referring to? When you read that, who was the you? That passage I just read on page 39. I will say you. Yeah. So on page 30, yeah, go ahead.
I was like, maybe she's talking about the reader.
I think so, right? Who's ever listening to her? That's the, and she's trying to set up like this intimacy, although she doesn't want to know our names because that would mean that we exist in Gilead. You see what I'm talking about? And she wouldn't wish that on anybody, but that she's speaking intimately to this other, to us. Yeah. And then on page 267, is it the same you, I wonder? Remember that first passage is all about, she wishes this was a story, but this isn't a story, but it is a story, you know? On page 267, I wish the story were different. I wish it were more civilized. I wish it showed me in a better light, if not happier, then at least more active, less hesitant, less distracted by trivia. I wish it had more shape. I wish it were about love, or about sudden realizations important to one's life, or even about sunsets, birds, rainstorms, or snow. Maybe it is about those things. Oops, sorry. In a way, but in the meantime, there's so much else getting in the way, so much whispering, so much speculation about others, so much gossip that cannot be verified, so many unsaid words, so much creeping about and secrecy. And there's so much time to be endured, time heavy as fried food or thick fog. And then all at once, these red events, like explosions on streets otherwise decorous and matronly and somnolent. I'm sorry there's so much pain in this story. I'm sorry it's in fragments, like a body caught in crossfire or pulled apart by force, but there's nothing I can do to change it. I've tried to put some of the good things in as well, flowers, for instance, because where would it be without them? Nevertheless, it hurts me to tell it over again. Once was enough. Wasn't once enough for me at the time? But I keep on going with this sad and hungry and sordid, this limping and mutilated story. Because after all, I want you to hear it, as I will hear yours too if I ever get the chance, if I meet you, or if you escape, in the future or in heaven or in prison or on underground, some other place. What they have in common is that they're not here. By telling you anything at all, I'm at least believing in you. I believe you're there. I believe you into being. Because I'm telling you the story, I will your existence. I tell, therefore you are. So I will go on. So I will myself to go on. I'm coming to a part you will not like at all, because in it I did not behave well, but I will try nonetheless to leave nothing out. After all you've been through, you deserve whatever I have left, which is not much, but includes the truth. Who's the you there? Kelly, do you still think it's the reader that she's wanting to tell the truth to? Is it the reader to whom she's apologizing for the fragments and the sordidness and the mutilation?
So on that, I feel like, I don't know, I feel like she's talking to herself. She's referring to herself.
Whoa, that's deep. I never thought about that. Kelly, tell me what you mean by that.
I mean,
That's deep.
so like, I just feel like maybe, like, you know, she feels as if she owes herself like the truth, and like she feels like she deserves better, you know, than what, you know, Gilead had to offer her. So I don't know.
What about anybody else?
I was thinking kind of like maybe for whoever finds the tapes, or the next person that escapes or is you know, in that bunker.
Good.
Maybe the other handmaids as well. Even if she can't, even if they're never gonna see it or hear about it, that I'm willing you into existence. I am willing you to find happiness, have a good life, and that.
Yeah. Yeah. Ilana, how about you? We haven't heard from you today.
Yeah, sorry. No, I really agree that she was making those tapes for the handmaidens who have escaped, since it was found in a safe house, and that she left it in a locker with all these other recordings so that whoever makes it out, they know what she went through and maybe kind of relate to her and understand of why she did certain things and why she didn't. And
yeah, I mean, it could be future readers, it could be present handmaids. I'm thinking it could also possibly be her daughter, right? The daughter she left behind, the you. I want to tell you the truth. That could be the you there too, or Luke, or anybody she loved, right? To kind of try to understand what she went through, why she chose the way she chose. Yeah, it's really it's a beautiful moment, and it's an incredibly tragic moment, right? Because the story is such a sad one. And that leads us to that last discussion then about the historical notes, because we have this incredibly personal, we have this struggle of this woman who is oppressed terribly in this society. But then how did the historians in the future, right? So the historical notes were supposed to be several hundred years in the future. Gilead has ended for all intents and purposes. They're looking back on Gilead as if it were like this, you know, like we would ancient Rome. Does that make sense, everybody, right? So these historians are looking back, and how do they treat Offred? How do they see her? Are they the you that she's talking to, do you think? Did this piss anybody? I'm an academic, and so when I was reading this, I was both horrified, but then I was sort of like, yeah, this is kind of accurate. They kind of dismiss her, right? They make jokes about the women in her position. They call it Handmaid's Tale, and then they have it TAIL, which is a nod, you know, in the 80s when you said like, oh man, he's gonna get himself some tail. It means like sex from a woman. Does that make sense, everybody? So they were dismissing her, treating her like she was this sexual object, like she was kind of like a prostitute. And I don't know about you, but for me, it was incredibly frustrating, you know, and that they kind of dismiss like, well, we wish you would have given more information about how the society was formed, and we wish you would have done X, Y, Z, right? And some of you might have, at the beginning of this novel, wished that she had given us more of that kind of information until we kind of fell in love with her, right? Like until we started listening to her as an individual. And I think that Atwood is trying to say that this is how history has treated women throughout time. That it hasn't, the history has concentrated on dates and the men who win wars and, you know, the people who are in control of society. And history, what history has not done, as Kelly has said again and again, right? Like African-American history, like that we haven't concentrated on what was it like? I mean, really, what was it like to be an enslaved person? You see what I'm talking about? We dismiss it. We talk about the founders of the country, but we don't concentrate on that. And why? It's because we don't see that as being important. We don't know about the interior lives of the women on the frontier. We don't know about the interior lives of women who survived war. We know accounts of the soldiers during the Civil War, but do we know much about the women? Not really. And it's mostly because we have not, as a society, seen those stories as being important. And even this beautiful novel, even this deep, rich, personal journey of this woman is dismissed at the end by these academics as not really being all that important because it didn't give important facts on the men who ran. Yeah.
So as I'm a history major, and reading the endnotes, like you said, it really made me annoyed because a lot of my classes nowadays are focused on getting to the stories that aren't actually told or seen as important in history, and so that's something that I'm really vocal about. Those stories are important, and then so just reading about it, how they dismissed her and her story, it brought up a lot of feelings of annoyance and anger, because you do see that a lot today. And so I don't know where I'm going with this point other than it just really annoyed me.
I don't know much either, except that sometimes when I go to conferences, and what people like to do is to take a piece of literature and like act like it's a dead body on a table, like we're doing some sort of like, oh, let's take a look at setting, and let's take a look at tone, and let's take a look at character. And it's just like, that's bullshit. Like, these are real life stories, you know what I mean? Like, this is real. And let's get to the richness of that experience instead of like analyzing it and tearing it down in all the pieces. And yeah, so I had the same sort of reaction when I was reading it. I was just like, how sad, because that's how these stories are remembered. Even when we get personal diaries of women throughout time, often, again, they're sort of dismissed. And I know for a lot of us, that ending is so frustrating, but I just want to throw this out there that that does make you in charge to some degree. You are now participating in what happens to Offred. Do you see it as hopeful? That says what kind of person you are. Do you see it as, dangerous? That's the kind of, you know what I mean? So it's really pulling you in as the reader, that she says she's willing you into being. We as readers are willing her into being. You see what I'm talking about? We are willing her into being, and you get to decide her fate. It's pretty beautiful, the power and responsibility Outwit is putting in our hands with Offred. And that's the end. Okay. I hope you get a chance to go check out the practice test that I put up for you. I don't know how many of you have taken it. Has anyone taken it yet? Did you try it?
Not yet.
Okay, so here's my promise. If you take it and you give a response, I'll shoot some messages back to you like, oh, that's really good, or try a little harder, or get a little deeper, that I can give you some of those like quick responses so you're better prepared for the test on Tuesday. It is timed, so on Tuesday, you'll get a test. You'll have 7 choices. You get to pick the 5 choices out of the 7. So you get some free will, some choice here. And then you can, you'll have about, I would say about 15 minutes each. That's how I would time myself, so that you have an hour and 15 minutes to do 5 responses. Does that make sense, everybody? And again, I'm not going to be there, so I can't make sure that you're not using your books, but I just want to counsel you. I caught plenty of people not plenty, that sounds bad, maybe 1 or 2. Okay. People last year who were using Spark Notes or using this, and I can tell, the system can tell. It's already connected to all the plagiarism stuff. So not that any of you would ever do that, but if you ever get to the point where you're like, I'm so insecure about my response, I'm going to look at what other people think, please don't. I really just want it to be you, your beautiful brain, and the text that we've read for this class. And you all do such a beautiful job in your discussion boards. That's exactly what we've been practicing this entire time, right? I give a question, I ask for your opinion, and you give it. And you have done beautifully. You're all really good readers. I just want to let you know that I honor that about you. And I want you to do well. So if you want to go ahead, take that practice quiz. If you have any questions, let me know. I will give you back some feedback if you want to take it. Otherwise, I will see you on Tuesday. If you have any other questions, please ask me about the test or the paper. Anybody have any questions? If you want to do some kind of creative project, a lot of my students decide to do that, and it's like awesome. It's great. So if any of you are like, I'm so tired of writing, I just, great. Some people have even done creative writing. So instead of writing an essay, maybe they write in the very much the style of Handmaid's Tale, but from the perspective of one of the other characters, like Serena Joy, or a character like even somebody tried The Commander one time, which was kind of interesting. Does that make sense, everybody? So again, you can get creative. I want to honor that. I think there's more than one way of interpreting a novel. But remember, preciousness is also a possibility, and so is Marina. All right. If you don't have any questions, that's great, because that means I gave you all the information that you needed. I wasn't sure if I kind of just throw it all at you, and like, I hope you can understand what I want. Okay. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much. Have a really, really great weekend. Take care, get some rest, stay safe, stay healthy, all of that good stuff. I'm gonna try to do that too. And this class is so much fun. Really love having y'all. All right, bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.